All right, so we're going to take a little bit of a look at a couple of things for some more brain parts. So we're going to start here a little bit with the kind of layers that make up the cerebellum. So what we're looking at here is essentially just some gray matter and kind of white matter with inside of the brain. So the gray matter, it's a little bit different from the spinal cord. The spinal cord is gray matter on the inside, white matter on the outside. The brain essentially is just the reverse: gray matter on the outside, white matter on the inside. So what you can see here, and I'll kind of try to highlight that a little bit with the pen here for you. We've got kind of this gray matter, all right, is this darker region that essentially outlines this portion of the cerebrum. So that's that outer layer that would kind of go through there. Okay. The white matter then is going to be the fiber tract. So this is the area inside of that. So this portion right here, you can see, is our white matter. And those are going to be those myelinated segments of neurons. Okay. So you can see one portion, and this is one of the ones that I think that ends up as a test question quite often, is there's a section that connects both hemispheres of the brain called the corpus callosum. All right, that's this little structure right here. They're kind of highlighting that structure. It sits about right here in the middle of the brain. When we do the sheep brain dissection video, you'll be able to kind of see that corpus callosum because that's the part that holds those two segments together. But pretty much that's where our white matter is, and this portion, this corpus callosum, is all white matter. There's no gray matter at all in that section. Okay, so those are the two areas that we look at. Other ones that we see are kind of what are referred to as basal nuclei. These are internal islands of gray matter. So these right here would be this little kind of basal nuclei, this little kind of area. I'll kind of highlight it. So that would be a sort of a basal nuclei, these little pockets of gray matter that are kind of stationed within the rest of the kind of cerebrum there. Okay, moving on a little bit, we'll talk a little bit about the diencephalon. So the diencephalon is the portion that actually sits on top of the brainstem. This is completely enclosed, so it's completely encompassed by the cerebrum, so the two hemispheres, and it's made up of these three parts. So it's made up of the thalamus, hypothalamus, and what's called the epithalamus. So we'll talk a little bit about each one of those sections kind of going forward here. All right, so this just shows you a little bit of kind of where that diencephalon is. So if we're kind of looking at the different diagram here, the diencephalon sits pretty much right here on top of the area. So the diencephalon essentially is associated with this segment right here. So this is the brainstem, the green, right? And the diencephalon is mostly this blue up here at the top. And you can see we've got the thalamus associated with that. We got the hypothalamus. And then the other section is going to be over here. So there's the thalamus over there, right? So those are our basic kind of sections that we deal with that, but that's mostly what we're looking at when we talk about the diencephalon. So the purpose of the diencephalon really is to relay some of that sensory impulses to different areas of the brain. And this is kind of what really its main job is to transfer those impulses to the correct part of the cerebrum. So that way we can specifically get those interpreted. So remember, we've got impulses coming up the brainstem essentially towards the brain, and so it would make its way to the diencephalon, and then if it was supposed to be, say, kind of motor, we would head here towards the parietal portion or the parietal lobe. If it's mostly memory, we're going to end up in the frontal lobe, right? But that's what the thalamus as kind of job is here, is to relate and kind of get those into the right portions. Okay, hypothalamus, on the other hand, is really involved in our autonomic nervous system. Okay, so this is the kind of portions that are regulated that we don't really have to control. So we've got regulation of body temperature. So that's the difference where, so if your body temperature increases, the hypothalamus sends a signal out and we start to sweat. If it decreases, the hypothalamus sends a signal out and we start to shiver. It also controls our water balance. So it will control the kidneys pulling water out of our bloodstream or putting it back. And it will also control our thirst center. So the hypothalamus is involved in that. And then one of the other things it does is it regulates metabolism. All right. So our body's ability to kind of process things. We talked a little bit about this already, but the pituitary gland is actually attached to that. So this kind of purplish structure right through here is the hypothalamus, and the pituitary is this little structure right here. All right, so that's kind of that little stalk that kind of hangs down from there, but that's the pituitary region right there. So they're kind of associated with it. So remember, the pituitary secretes the antidiuretic hormone, or the ADH. So that's one of the reasons why that's associated with this part of the brain. Okay. The other portion then is the epithalamus. So this is the portion here towards the back. So in this diagram, what you're looking at for the most part is this kind of whitish area right through here. So that's going to be our epithalamus. And this is where the pineal gland is actually. So this is part of the endocrine system. All right. And it also contains what's called the coracoid plexus, which is the big portion. This would be one I would kind of remember. The coracoid plexus specifically forms or helps form cerebral spinal fluid. So if we have any issues with cerebral spinal fluid formation or anything like that, we start to worry if we have an issue with this part of the brain. If there's anything that's having issues with anything associated with the pineal gland and the hormones associated with it, then we worry also if we've got some sort of an issue in this portion. All right. Next section here, we'll talk a little bit about then is brainstem. So this is what actually attaches to the spinal cord. So this is how the brain attaches itself to the spinal cord. Again, there are three segments here. We've got what's called the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla. All right. So you can kind of see those segments here. So the midbrain is the yellow region right through here. The pons is going to be this bluish region, and then the medulla is the very bottom portion of the brainstem, right at about the level is where the brainstem leaves the skull. Okay, so those are our three basic sections. We'll go over each one here in just a second. So just another segment that kind of show us again, the green structure here is all brainstem. Again, upper portion is midbrain. We got pons, and then this little kind of protrusion here towards the bottom is the medulla. All right, so midbrain, what does it actually do for us? It's mostly composed of these tracts of kind of nerve fibers, but the big thing for the midbrain is it's one of the reflex centers for vision. All right, so any brainstem activity that we see looking here, we're worried about that portion. So one of the tests that we do specifically for concussions is we're looking at eye reflexes, so the pupil's ability to constrict and dilate. If somebody is unable to do that, then we worry that they've got a brainstem injury, and that could mean essentially they're probably most likely brain dead at that point. But that's really what we're looking at in those cases. Right. Pons, again, is also fiber tracts, but this one is controlling breathing. So the pons is really associated with breathing and relaxation. Right. Again, it's kind of a very base kind of I would look for the word for it here. It's kind of a primal reflex that we have in the body. So if we were to lose consciousness, in most cases, this portion of our brain would take over and we would start to kind of breathe on our own again. It would be a weird kind of breathing. I don't know if anybody saw the one of the basketball games over spring break, but the referee that passed out, he had what we call, when he passed out, you could tell he was out because he has what we call agonal breathing, this kind of really deep rhythmic kind of breathing that is not being controlled by the patient themselves. It's an autonomic, it's a reflex that kind of happens when people pass out because of either illness or other things. That's one of the things that sometimes happens to them, is they get that kind of agonal breathing. All right. The medulla then is the very lowest portion of the brainstem, and then we've got a little bit of some of the kind of control centers here. So we get heart rate control, so that's going to control our kind of the speed of our heart rate. Blood pressure regulation is in this one as well. Breathing is controlled here, swallowing, and also vomiting. So again, in a concussion assessment, we are looking for different portions of this. Okay, so I'm not really looking so much for heart rate control or blood pressure, but I could attach a pulse ox to this individual and have him stand up, sit down, kind of look at some things. We could ask them to swallow. All right, if they can't swallow, then we worry that they've got a brainstem injury. And then another one sometimes we do is is if they're vomiting, then obviously we worry that they have sort of a kind of a brainstem or very low level kind of issue here. Okay. Other things that we have here in the brain, we've got what's referred to as a reticular formation. All right, so the reticular formation is involved in motor control of our visceral organs, so our abdominal organs. It's also involved in kind of this sleep-wake cycle in the brain. So if people have problems sleeping, we wonder if there's an issue with this kind of reticular formation. The other thing that we worry about then is if they're having some kind of digestive upset or issues that isn't associated with either endocrine or associated with digestion itself, then we wonder if we've got some sort of an issue here in the brain kind of going on there. All right. Next section here is the cerebellum. So there's two hemispheres here that are kind of what we call convoluted surfaces. But the big thing with the cerebellum is it helps regulate our balance, posture, movement, and then muscle coordination. So those are all things that we are also assessing when we take a look at a concussion evaluation. We're looking at people's balance, movement, muscle coordination. All those things are kind of looked at in there. Okay.